A reading from Ecclesiastes. Vanity of vanities, says the teacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. I, the teacher, when king over Israel and Jerusalem, applied my mind to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to human beings to be busy with. I saw all the deeds that are done under the sun, and see, all is vanity and a chasing after wind. I hated all my toil in which I had toiled under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to those who come after me. And who knows whether they will be wise or foolish? Yet they will be master of all for which I have toiled, and use my wisdom under the sun. This also is vanity. So I turned and gave up my heart to despair concerning all the toil of my labors under the sun, because someone who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave all to be enjoyed by another who did not toil for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. What do mortals get from all the toil and strain with which they toil under the sun? For all their days are full of pain, and their work is a vexation. Even at night their minds do not rest. This also is vanity. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. We read responsively from Psalm 49. Hear this, all you peoples. Give ear, all you who dwell in the world. You of high degree and low, rich and poor together. My mouth shall speak of wisdom, and my heart shall meditate on understanding. I will incline my ear to a proverb, and set forth my riddle upon the heart. Why should I be afraid in evil days, when the wickedness of those at my heels surrounds me, the wickedness of those who put their trust in their own prowess, and boast of their great riches? One can never redeem another, or give to God the ransom for another's life. For the ransom of a life is so great that there would never be enough to pay it, in order to live forever and ever, and never see the grave. For we see that the wise die also, like the dull and the stupid they perish, and leave their wealth to those who come after them. Their graves shall be their homes forever, their dwelling places from generation to generation, though they had named lands after themselves. Even though honored, they cannot live forever. They are like the beasts that perish. A reading from Colossians. So if you have been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things that are above, not on things that are on earth. For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, is revealed, then you also will be revealed with him in glory. Put to death, therefore, whatever in you is earthly: fornication, impurity, passion, evil desire, and greed, which is idolatry. On account of these, the wrath of God is coming on those who are disobedient. These are the ways you also once followed when you were living that life. But now you must get rid of all such things: anger, wrath, malice, slander, and abusive language from your mouth. Do not lie to one another, seeing that you have stripped off the old self with its practices, and have clothed yourselves with the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge according to the image of its creator. In that renewal there is no longer Greek and Jew, circumcised and uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave and free, but Christ is all in all. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. The Holy Gospel according to Luke, the 12th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." But Jesus said to him, "Friend, who set me to be judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Then he told them a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly, and he thought to himself, "What should I do? For I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry. But God said to him, You fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God. The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Who knows the story of Sisyphus? Anybody? Do you? Oh, you know, okay, you're talking about Sisyphus. Okay, the story of Sisyphus comes to us from Greek mythology. Okay, Sisyphus is said to be the ruler of a city that we now best know as the city of Corinth. You know, the people to whom Paul writes in 1st and 2nd Corinthians. So, this Sisyphus, as king, he's known for his craftiness and his trickery. Well, one day, Sisyphus decides to betray Zeus, the head god, by telling one of the lesser gods where Zeus is hiding that god's daughter in exchange for more water flow into Corinth to build his wealth. And so out of anger at this betrayal, Zeus orders Hades, the god of the underworld, to chain Sisyphus up in the underworld. So Hades captures him, and he takes him down to the underworld, the spot where he's going to chain him up. And Sisyphus is like, Hey, Hades, can you show me how those chains you're going to use work? And so instead of getting chained up, Sisyphus actually chains up Hades. And he escapes death. But with Hades chained up, nobody can die. There's nobody to take them to the underworld. So Ares, the god of war, is angry because he's looking out at all these wars he's creating and says, well, nobody's dying anymore. This isn't fun. So he travels to the underworld and he frees Hades, and then he drags Sisyphus back down to Hades. But before he can be taken there, Sisyphus says to his wife, when I die, throw my body out into the streets. So now, because his body hasn't been properly buried before he crosses into the land of the dead, Sisyphus tricks Persephone, the goddess of the underworld, to let him return to the world to take revenge on his wife, who didn't properly bury his body like he asked her. So his trickery allows him to escape death a second time. Well, Zeus has had enough at this point, so he sends Hermes, the herald of the gods, to drag Sisyphus back to the underworld. And as punishment, Zeus forces Sisyphus to roll a large boulder up a very steep hill. But Hades is still angry that Sisyphus has twice cheated death, so he adds a further punishment. Just as Sisyphus gets to the top of the hill, Hades has made it so the boulder rolls right back down to the bottom. Sisyphus is condemned to an eternity of rolling a boulder up a hill over and over and over. Many of us feel like sometimes our lives are like Sisyphus. It's life, it seems, can be a monotony of the same thing over and over and over. Get up, go to work, come home, eat, clean up, watch TV, put the kids to bed, go to sleep. And the next day, the same thing. And the next day, the same thing. And the next day, you get the picture. Well, of course, we eventually get to a weekend, and on the weekends, we break that routine. We get a day or two off of work. We socialize with family and friends. We eat out. We take our partners on date nights. We enjoy a glass of wine or a cold beer. We play with kids and grandkids, nieces and nephews. And in those moments, we experience something of a kind of joy. We feel the joy that comes from the simple pleasures of life: food and drink, family and friends. But Monday always comes around again. And with Monday comes the routine of the return of that same routine that we live our lives day in and day out. There was a survey that was published in the New York Times not too long ago. It asked people, if you had an extra day, an extra hour in the day, if the day was 25 hours instead of 24, what would you do with that extra hour? Who can guess what the number one answer was? Sleep. Sleep. We spend so much of our lives in the monotony and the routine of work. We're so overworked and overstressed and overbooked in our schedules that if we were given an extra hour every single day to enjoy God's creation, we would sleep. which should have us asking the question, what do we do all this for anyway? What is the point of all this work? What is the point of the routines that we live day in and day out? Why are we stressing ourselves out over work and schedules and running from place to place? What does it get us? What is the point of all of this? The writer of Ecclesiastes has a word for it. Hevel. Now, the word hevel gets translated in different ways. The NRSV, which we read this morning, translates it as vanity. Other translations use meaningless or futility or no purpose. Hevel literally means vapor or smoke. So think about smoke for a minute. When you see smoke in front of you, it appears to have shape and form and substance. You can see that it's there. You know it exists. And it looks almost like it has something of a solidness to it. But as soon as you try to grab it, as soon as you try to take hold of it or control it or mold it or shape it, it eludes you. It disperses, it disappears, it moves through your fingers without letting you get a hold of it. That, the writer of Ecclesiastes says, is what all your efforts in this life are. They're hevel. They're nothing but smoke. But let's step back for a moment and introduce ourselves to the book of Ecclesiastes. Most of us are familiar with at least part of the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 3 from what? 1963 song. To everything, turn, turn, turn. Yeah, so the Byrds song, Turn, 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 reached number 1 on the Billboard charts in 1965 and comes from Ecclesiastes 3. In our Bibles, Ecclesiastes is known to us as one of the wisdom books, right? The wisdom books are Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Job, and sometimes Song of Songs. Now, one approach you could take is to say, I want to understand the wisdom of God. And so you might resolve yourself to set these books, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Job, side by side, and deep dive into a study of what they have to say, and come up with some comprehensive understanding of God's wisdom. And if you do that, I can promise you this one thing. You are going to walk away from that endeavor incredibly frustrated. Because Proverbs and Ecclesiastes and Job don't present a unified understanding of wisdom. Instead, they present us with a conversation about the nature of wisdom. And as conversation partners, sometimes they agree and sometimes they strongly disagree. Because what they're doing is giving us a variety of perspectives on the nature of God's wisdom and its role in human life. So at the risk of being too simplistic, this is the gist of Proverbs. And we talked about this back during Lent when we walked through the book of Job. But Proverbs essentially says, do good and be rewarded, do evil and be punished. Proverbs says that's how God's wisdom works itself in our world. If you follow God's commandments, if you keep God's law, then God's going to reward you with blessings in your life. And we read this all over in the scriptures, right? Over and over, God tells God's people, keep my statutes and commandments that you might live long in the land that I am giving to you. And conversely, Proverbs teaches that if you neglect God's law, if you disobey the commandments, if you do whatever you want, whenever you want, without regard to God's law, you're going to be punished. And so do we see this played out in the scriptures, not the least of which is the people's understanding of the Babylonian exile as punishment for turning away from God. But then remember, the inverse is also true. If you see someone whose life is filled seemingly with blessings, well, that must be a real godly person. And if you see someone who has just about everything go the wrong way for them, they probably did something to deserve it. Remember the disciples' question to Jesus in John chapter 9 when they encounter a blind man. Who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? This, Proverbs says, is the economy of God when it comes to wisdom. So now enter the teacher. Now it used to be thought that this teacher of Ecclesiastes was Solomon, but for a lot of reasons we won't get into, we now know that this is highly unlikely. More likely, this is a sage writing sometime after the Babylonian exile who assumes the identity of Solomon as a starting point to lay the groundwork for his argument. which was a fairly common practice at the time. So we call him the teacher. But the teacher's voice isn't the only one we hear in Ecclesiastes. The book is framed in the very first 11 verses, some of which we heard this morning, and the very last 7 verses of the book, by what we call the frame narrator, who situates the teacher's words within a frame, a context to make a larger point. So if we want to understand the book of Ecclesiastes, we have to understand this point that the frame narrator is trying to make and how he uses the words of the teacher to make that point. But to start, what are the first words we hear from the teacher? Hevel, hevel. All is hevel. Meaningless, meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Or futile, futile. Everything is futile. Smoke, smoke. Everything is smoke. So it's going to be a feel-good book, right? The teacher tells us he went on something of a journey. He applied himself to understanding everything that happens on this earth. He wanted to acquire wisdom and to understand why things happen the way they happen. And what did he discover? All life is hevel. You ever been to a sandcastle competition? Has anybody ever been to one of these? Well, on the beach, people come out from all across the town and the region to build the biggest and the best sandcastle. It's a day that's filled with fun and laughter and sweat and hard work. The people who come to do the competition bring all these different tools, and they have down to a science the amount of water they need for the sand to make the castle stand the way they want it to, and they do all this fine detail work. They work tirelessly all day. And at the end of the day, the judges go around, and then they have a big party in the evening where they announce the winners, and they give out awards and prizes. And then what happens? What happens to all that hard work, all that effort, all that precision and building and cutting? The tide comes in, and it washes it all away. By the next morning, there's no evidence of the hard work of the day before. That is life, the teacher says. That's the result of all the hard work and all the effort you put into this life. And it is all hevel. But Ecclesiastes says, this is an incredible gift. There is an incredible freedom to be found in the wisdom that all life is hevel. But first, the teacher wants to break down all these assumptions we have about how life is supposed to work. So that's what he does. Through the book of Ecclesiastes, the teacher examines all these different aspects of human life: work, pleasure, wealth, desire, knowledge and learning, righteousness, youth and old age, worry and anxiety. And the conclusion that he draws in every single case is that all of it, every single bit of it, is hevel. Because no matter how smart you are, no matter how wise you are, how well-liked you are, how many friends you have, how much you accomplish, or how much money you have, the same fate awaits us all: death. So why do you work so hard? Why do you spend so much of your time and your effort, your blood and your sweat and your tears at work? It's hevel. Why do you save up your money? Why do you buy bigger and better equipment and tools and toys? It's hevel. Why do you pack your schedule so full of things to do? Why are you running around like crazy to get your kids or your grandkids from one thing to another? What's the point of that? It's hevel. Why do you worry so much? Why do you tear your hair out over the decisions you face? Why do you stay awake at night worrying about the past and the future? It's hevel. All of life is hevel. So what do all these things have in common? They represent our attempts to control the world around us. We think that if we do more or buy more or act in certain ways, that we can influence the outcome of our lives. All right, have you ever been driving down the road, going the speed limit? Actually, I'm usually in the other car. Maybe you're going like 5 miles an hour over, and another car, like on a 2-lane highway, comes racing up right behind you. I'm usually the second car. But okay, so they tailgate you for a while, and then finally, when it's clear enough, they zoom around past you. Right? We've been both drivers. I definitely have. And what always happens when you get to the next stop sign or you get to the stoplight? You're both right there. Does flying around someone like that actually get you to your destination any faster? Usually not. But we're anxious, and we're in a hurry, and we think we're really important, and we need to go even faster. So we take matters into our own hand, and we pass that other car. And it doesn't do you a bit of good. It's hevel. The other night, our girls wouldn't go to sleep. Parents will understand this, grandparents. We followed our usual bedtime routine. We'd done everything exactly the same as we do every other night, but for some reason, they just couldn't or wouldn't go to sleep. So over and over, they kept coming out of their room. And by the fifth or sixth time that somebody needed water or the bathroom or to ask some question, I lost it. I'm not proud of it, but I was tired, I was exhausted, I was frustrated with their behavior, and I lost it. I yelled at them. I threatened to take away their toys, their TV time. I said they'd have to take a nap the next day, which they hate. I threatened not to let them share a room anymore. We'd take their bunk beds apart and make them sleep in separate rooms. And someone, we said, would have to sleep in the basement with the spiders. I'm evil, I know. And you know what? It didn't help. They didn't fall asleep any faster. All that happened is I was more frustrated, and then I felt guilty for yelling at them. So if you have kids or grandkids or nieces or nephews, you've been there too. Like me in that situation, you want to control their behavior. You want them to do what you want. And of course there's times when that's necessary, especially when safety is a concern. But their behavior in bed or at the grocery store or at someone else's house, I can help shape and direct that behavior, and I can help them grow and they learn, but we cannot control other people. And any attempt to do so is hevel. I had my annual review at work this past week. I still have a job, so that's good. And in the course of that conversation, as we spoke about my dual role in the clinic and in the church, my supervisor remarked how impressive it is that I've essentially worked, like 60 hours a week across 2 jobs for 7 years, 2.5 of which has been this global pandemic. But those kinds of hours aren't unusual for most Americans. Most of us, maybe some of you, work more than that. We live in a culture that values busyness. We think that people who are more busy, who are working hard and sacrificing for their job, are doing something honorable. We applaud these people. We reward these people. We think that we should be more like them and that our lives would be better if we would only put in a few more days, a few more hours extra each day. But why? What do you gain? What do you get from all the extra hours you put in at work or in the field? What's the payoff for the missed family time, the missed baseball games, the missed birthday parties? More money? More recognition? It's hevel. And it all stems from our anxiousness and a deep-seated insecurity over a sense of a need to control our lives and produce the outcome we want. Life doesn't work that way. We know it doesn't. We know people who work hard and do the right thing and go to church every Sunday, and they get sick and die from disease, or they fall fate to some horrible tragedy. And we know people who are mean and ornery and wouldn't lift a finger to help another person if their life depended on it, and those people seem to just have everything go right. You cannot control your life. You cannot, by your own efforts, ensure that your life will go the way you want it to. And to think that you can, and to try to do that day in and day out, is nothing but hevel. That's what the teacher is trying to tell us. Now listen to what the teacher says in chapter 4. When I saw that all the toil and all the skill and work come from one person's envy of another, this also is hevel and a chasing after wind. Fools fold their hands and consume their own flesh. Better is a handful with quiet than 2 handfuls with toil and a chasing after wind. So in English we have one word for hand, but in Hebrew there's actually 3. And I think this verse is key to what the teacher's trying to tell us. Fools fold their hands and consume their own flesh. The word for hand that's used is yad. And yad refers to your hand and your forearm. So what is it to fold your arms? It's to resign yourself to idleness and laziness. Fools fold their arms. and consume their own flesh. You could, in response to hearing that all your striving in this world is hevel, fold up your arms and just give up. That, the teacher says, is foolish. Or you could posture yourself, the teacher says, with 2 handfuls with toil. And the word that the teacher uses is hoffen. You got to get a little spit in the back of your throat. Hoffen. And hoffen means the hollow of both your hands, which is something like a grasping position. You could work harder. You could grasp after control of life in this world. You could press on even harder, trying to make things go the way you want them to go. But this, the teacher says, is hevel, and a chasing after the wind. You will drive yourself mad with your hoffen, but you'll never succeed. Instead, the teacher says, better is a quiet handful. This time the Hebrew is malo nahat, which means something like a handful of peace and calm. It's a single open palm, ready to receive and hold on to the things of this world without grasping or trying to control them, with your other arm resting at your side. And I think that brings us close to what the teacher is trying to tell us in Ecclesiastes. You will die. It's going to happen at some point, regardless of how you live your life. And any attempt to control the outcome of your living is just hevel. So let it go. Let go of your need for control. Let go of your worry. Let go of your anxiety. Let go of your need to do or be better than other people. Let go of your need to fill your life with busyness. Let go of your need to fill your house up with stuff. Because in the final analysis, you can't control these things anyway. And all you get for your efforts are more worry, more anxiety, less sleep, and less joy. The only moment that really matters is this one. Not some moment in your past, not some moment waiting for you in the future, but this one. The gift of Ecclesiastes, the gift of the teacher, the gift of seeing that all your efforts to control your lives and the lives of others as hevel is a joy in life that savors this moment exactly for what it is, a gift from God. So eat good food. Have a drink with friends. Enjoy the company of loved ones and neighbors and friends. Enjoy the work of building the sandcastles of your life. Not because of the outcome and the reward, but for the experience and the joy of creating. Live in this moment, because this moment and every single moment of your life is a gift from God. When you realize that all your worry, all your striving, all your attempts to control are hevel, a smoke you cannot grasp or bend to your will, you're set free to live how God created us to live. That's why the frame narrator at the very end of the book is able to conclude this. The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for that is the whole duty of everyone. Reverently worship and respect God and keep God's commandments, not because doing so is going to guarantee some kind of outcome in your life, because you've been freed from the grasping of your hoffen, and you're able to live with a mellow nahat. And following God's commandments is no longer than an obligation over which I must be anxious or a means to my own satisfaction, but a response of gratitude for the gift of life that we've been given. And the more I reflect on that, this gift of life lived in freedom and joy in this moment, and God's law as the gift to define our relationships with God and each other, the more I'm reminded of Jesus. Can you hear the echoes of the teachings of Jesus and the roots of the Reformation? You cannot save yourself. You cannot earn God's favor or blessing, but free from the power of sin and death, free from the powers of insecurity and anxiety over your future, you can follow God's commandments in joy. Because you were not created to grasp after control of this world around you and the events of your life. You were created for rest and joy in the presence of God. That's the gift of Ecclesiastes, and it's the gift of Jesus Christ. Thanks be to God. Amen.